Hello, everyone. Welcome to Safe Flower Handling, Know Your Role. We're going to wait just a few minutes to make sure everyone who wants to be here is able to log on. While we're waiting, if you want to go ahead and comment in the chat, let us know where you're from. We would appreciate hearing about that. Looks like there's a lot of people from all over the United States. I'm not seeing one state that has the most people specifically. Okay, so we're gonna go ahead and get started now. So my name is Sarah Spencer. I go to Ohio State University, and I'm the program intern for the Partnership for Food Safety Education. I'll be the one moderating this webinar today. So for welcoming and housekeeping, we're going to do that real fast, and then afterwards we will hear from Jane DeMarchi on the milling process and why flour is considered a raw ingredient. We will then hear from Fanfan and Sharmi from the FDA with their research and tools for flour safety. Then we will hear from Katie Weston on the new educational resources that we have been working on. Then we will transition over to the Q&A with guest speakers. So we encourage you to leave your comments in the chat. If you have any questions, we ask you to please put them in the Q&A box so we can see them at the end. After the webinar, you're going to receive a short survey. We ask you to fill that out just to help us out a little bit. And so for the continuing education units, we do have CEUs available. There's a few different ways you can get them. You can download them from the chat box during the webinar. You can also get them from the follow-up email after the webinar, or you can download them at fightback.org under the free resources tab and recorded webinars for a few days after the webinar has ended. Remember, if you are seeking NCHEC credits, you must complete the online questionnaire by Tuesday, January 2nd in order to receive them. So in case you're new here, a little bit about the partnership. We are an active network of 13,000 health and food safety educators, 40 partner organizations, and federal liaisons like the CDC, FDA, and USDA. We're all working together to advance trusted, consistent, science-based behavioral health messaging. So food safety obviously is very important. 1 in 6 people get sick annually. 120,000 are hospitalized and 3,000 will die from eating contaminated food. And that's why we're here today. We want to talk about the importance of flour safety specifically. And that brings us into our first poll. So do you consider flour to be a raw ingredient? Yes, no, maybe, I'm not sure, or I never thought about it. I'll give you a minute to fill that poll out.
Sarah, I think you're still muted. I'll go ahead and...
No, I got it. Sorry about that. Okay, so it looks like the results, 75% of people do consider it to be a raw ingredient. 2% said no, 7% said they were not sure, and 16% said they had never thought about it. 75% of you saying yes. That's obviously a very good thing. We're going to go ahead and transition over to Jane DeMarchi with the North American Millers Association and flour food safety.
Thanks very much. And, I'm so gratified to see the results of that survey. So it sounds like many of you guys are aware already of flour and the issues surrounding it. So I'm Jane DeMarchi. I'm the president of the North American Millers Association. We represent the wheat flour, corn meal, and oatmeal producers. So when you think about it, our members make everything from cereals, pasta, cake, cookies, all the really good pizza, all the really good stuff that we love to eat. But I'm here to talk to you today a little bit about what goes into making flour and about the fact that it is a raw ingredient. So next slide, please. One of the things I want to leave you with is an understanding of the vast scope and scale of the wheat growing and milling industry. So in the US alone, about 40 million acres of wheat are grown. And you can see there on the slide pictures of the wheat right before it's harvested and being harvested. So flour is made from this raw grain that is grown and harvested in nature, and it is exposed to the elements. When you think about 40 million acres, we cannot build fences and greenhouses around that. So it is outside and it is exposed to both the elements and animals who might be in the field. So next slide, please. So again, thinking about the importance of wheat flour, remember that ground grain was one of the civilization's first foods, and it's really what enabled us to go from being hunters and gatherers to actually being agriculture-based communities, and then eventually being able to work in jobs that are outside of farming. So it is critically important to humankind. And again, as I mentioned, the scope and scale is quite enormous. In 2020, US millers ground over 918 million bushels of wheat to make 42.5 billion pounds of flour. So that equals out to about 130.7 pounds of flour each year for the average American. And again, think about your bread, your pasta, your pizza, your pancakes, all those things that you're eating that are come with flour in them. And each bushel of wheat can produce about 91 pound loaves of whole wheat bread or 210 servings of spaghetti. So again, big scope and big scale. So next slide, please. And wheat flour has a very strong food safety track record. However, when you think back about those first pictures I showed, wheat is grown outside and it is exposed to animals like birds and deer and mice and other chipmunks. So E. coli and other naturally occurring pathogens are present in nature, in fields, and in the crops that are eventually turned into wheat flour. So next slide, please. So this is a picture of a mill. This mill is a pasta plant that's based in St. Louis. And I want you to look at the picture from left to right. On the left side, you can see a railroad line. This mill gets deliveries of wheat flour from North Dakota. So the wheat goes from North Dakota down to Missouri via rail. Some of those rail deliveries are 140 car shuttle trains. So again, that's one delivery of wheat, 140 rail cars. It's then you'll see also trucks. Sometimes they get truck deliveries of wheat as well, but primarily the trucks are used to take the finished product out. Then again, moving, you see the giant silos where the wheat is stored. Well, it's being well, they're waiting to process it in the mill, which the mill is the multi-story building to the next, to the side of it. So in the next slide, I'll show you what it looks like inside a mill. So this is inside a mill. And as you remember from the picture you just saw, it's multiple stories. And what wheat milling really is a process of analyzing the wheat, blending the wheat together to get the desired finished product that you want, made up of all the different varieties of wheat, and then essentially grinding and sifting the wheat, grinding and sifting and blending again and again, multiple times. So if you look here on the left, these are the machines that grind the wheat. They are milling it. And then it will go to the right side. Those are the sifters. So then they will reduce the flour based on the particle size. Big pieces go back into the grinding and milling machines, and then they go back to the sifter over and over and over again. But what is the thing that you notice? There is no kill step in this process. They're taking the raw wheat, they're grinding it and sifting it, but they're not cooking it while it is in the mill. Okay, next slide, please. So basically what you're hearing is traditional milling does not include a process to eliminate the presence of pathogens such as E. coli and Salmonella that may have been present in the wheat from when it came from the field. And what research has showed is that there is a low pathogen presence in wheat, but it does exist. It's anywhere from 0.1 to 3%. Again, low levels, but it does exist. And the traditional milling process does not create a ready-to-eat product. It does not include a kill step. So for that reason, and moving on to the next slide, NAMA members make sure to label products that consumers find in the grocery store. And there's a variety of different messages that we've tried to get customers' attention. Sometimes it'll just say flour is raw. Please cook fully before enjoying. Or on this recipe card from Pillsbury, you'll see it says, do not eat raw batter. And what we find is that raw batter is very delicious. FDA is going to talk about that. And so customers really need to be reminded not to do that. We have some more examples of labels on the next slide as well. So you can see this one, the raw flour is not ready to eat. It must be thoroughly cooked or baked. Do not eat or play with raw dough. Wash hands, utensils, and surfaces after handling. After opening, keep cool and dry in a sealed container. And then on the right, flour is not ready to eat and must be thoroughly cooked before eating. I want to take a moment to mention things like raw cookie dough ice cream, or now you can see in the grocery store some raw dough products that are labeled for raw consumption. Those products that are served intentionally raw do go through another processing step in the mill. Generally, it is a heat treatment or other chemical processing step to make it safe to eat raw. Those are a specific subset of products and not the general products that you would see in the bagged flour that you find at the grocery store. So, and you can move on to the final slide. We do have resources available on our website showing all of this information. We have posters that you can download and videos that you can download for your use. But the most important thing I want to leave you with is there is a vast scale for wheat growing and processing in the United States. And during the milling process, there is not a kill step. We are grinding down the wheat into smaller and smaller particles, but not doing a kill step unless there is a specific need in the application in the finished food product. So thank you for your time today. And I look forward to your questions.
Okay, thank you, Jane, for your presentation. Remember, if you have any questions for her, to put them into the Q&A box so we can get to them at the end. It's time for the second poll. So the question is, has anyone in your household consumed batter or dough containing raw flour in the past year? The options are yes, several times, yes, a couple of times, no, not even once, or maybe I'm not sure. I'll give you just a few minutes or a few seconds to fill that in, and we will see what the results are. Okay, just a few more seconds. Okay, let's go ahead and close that poll and we'll look at the results. So it looks like 23% said yes several times, 24% said yes a couple of times, 40% said no, not even once, and 12% said maybe, I'm not sure. Obviously, we are happy about the 40%, the majority or the highest percentage of people saying no, not even once. We're going to go ahead and talk about this a little bit more with our next speaker. We're going to talk with Fanfan Wu and Sharmi Das from the FDA on the research findings on flour and FDA tools. So I'm going to go ahead and pass the mic over to them.
Thank you so much, Sarah, and thank you everyone for having us here today at the webinar. My name is Fanfan Wu. I'm a social scientist working at FDA, Center for Food Safety, Applied Nutrition, Consumer Studies branch. So today I'm really excited to share some of recent FDA research findings on flour and also on uncooked flour. And then I will pass the floor to Sharmi Das, who's the Division Director of Education, Outreach, and Information at FDA, who will be talking about FDA tools related to flour. Next slide. So a very quick outline for today's presentation. On my part, I will provide an overview of the project, talk a little bit about the methodology, and then really focus on the results related to flour and uncooked flour, and then end with a very short summary. Next. So a very quick overview of the project I will be talking about. This is a project I have been leading for a while, and then it's called FDA Quick Turnaround Consumer Surveys on Ongoing Food Recalls. The goal of this project is to collect quick turnaround consumer data to really understand consumers' knowledge, perception, of ongoing food recalls and outbreaks to inform FDA's communications during these events. So far, we have done 2 quick turnaround surveys on 2 recent food recalls, and one of them was the gold medal flour recall, which was issued on April 28th. So we have filled a survey on this specific recall to collect consumer data on their knowledge, their awareness, their perception and behavior of this specific recall. And we filled this survey during May 17th and May 21st of this year. And during this survey, we're able to ask some questions related to flour consumption and uncooked flour consumption, which I will be showing in a moment. Next, please. Some very quick facts about the survey. The survey itself was about 15 minutes, and then we had a total sample size of 1,208 respondents to complete the survey. The survey, we used a non-prohibited web panel to recruit our participants, and then it's called Dynata. So it's non-prohibited web panel and non-national representative. We want to make it clear, but we were able to balance the data to the US population in terms of demographics. Our respondents included those who were adults 18 years or older and who lived in the United States and were comfortable reading in English. Next, please. First, I will share some results about the consumption of flour. Next. So we had this question on the quick turnaround survey. We asked our participants, have you eaten or used flour in the past 12 months, in the past 30 days, or in the past 7 days? And they could answer yes and no to each of these sub-questions. The total sample size, again, was 1,208 respondents. And here in the darker blue bars are those who answered yes to each of the questions. And in the lighter blue bars are those who answered no to each of the questions. So we learned that 83% of consumers reported eating or using flour in the past 12 months. And we had 66% reporting eating or used flour in the past 30 days, and 39% reported yes in the past 7 days. So from this results really confirming that flour is a very commonly used commodity in the US. Next slide, please. We then followed up with a question asking the consumers, would you say that flour is something you eat or use regularly? Again, the total sample size was 1,208 respondents, and we actually had 58% of consumers reported eating or using flour regularly, confirming flour is really commonly used. We then did some analysis to look into who are these consumers who use or consume flour regularly, and we found significant difference by education and income. So as the graphs were showing here, we found that those with higher education background, with college graduation or higher, were more likely to report use or consuming flour regularly compared to those with lower education background, high school or lower. Also, we can see in the bottom part, those with the higher income, in the higher income bracket with 75K and plus income were more likely to consume or use flour regularly compared to those with lower income. We didn't find any significant difference by some other demographic variables such as gender, education. So these are the two that really popped out. Next, please. Now we're going to move on some really interesting data about consumer consumption of uncooked flour, also from this quick turnaround survey. Next, please. And before we dive into the results, I'm going to show the results from the quick turnaround survey, the one I have just been showing. And in addition to that, I also want to show a comparison between the quick turnaround survey and our 2019 food safety and nutrition survey, which we called FSANS. So the 2019 FSANS, it's a flagship survey that consumer studies conduct every couple of years, and the last iteration was 2019, and we have planned to conduct another survey in 2024, 2025. So because we have similar questions on both surveys asking about raw flour consumption, I really want to show the comparison data from both surveys. Next. And in this table, I'm quickly showing some differences and similarities between the two surveys and the questions we asked. So on the left column, you can see that's the details regarding the quick turnaround survey on the gold medal flour recall. And on the right, I had the details regarding to the 2019 FSANS. So the questions we asked on the quick turnaround survey, very similar to the one I just showed on flour. We asked, have you tasted or eaten something with uncooked flour in it, such as raw dough or raw cake mix in the past 12 months, 30 days, and past 7 days? Well, for the 2019 FSANS, we asked a very similar question. In the past 12 months, have you eaten or eaten something with uncooked flour in it, such as raw cake batter or raw homemade cookie dough? The two surveys, of course, were different in terms of methodology. For example, the quick turnaround survey, as I mentioned, used the non-probability sampling and the web panel, so it's not national representative. However, we're able to balance it to the US population. On the other hand, the 2019 FSANS was a national representative survey, which we used probability address-based sampling. Can we move next slide? So here, the green part, we're showing the results of the from the quick turnaround survey. We asked, have you tasted or eaten something with uncooked flour in it in the past 12 months, 30 days, or past 7 days? And in the darker green bars, you are seeing the consumers who answered yes to these questions, and the lighter green bars were the ones who answered no to these questions. And we learned that for the past 12 months, 34% of consumers reported tasting or eating something with uncooked flour in it. And then we had 21% who reported yes for the past 30 days, and 13% reported yes for the past 7 days. Now I want to show you the results we learned from the 2019 FSANS, where we asked a very similar question about uncooked flour. Next. So the blue bars were showing the results from the 2019 FSIMS. The darker blue parts were the ones who answered yes for the 12-month question. We had 35% of consumers who said yes, they have tasted or eaten something with uncooked flour in the past 12 months. So as you can see, from both surveys, we're getting very similar results, even though they were somewhat different in terms of methodology. But this is really validating the results we have on consumer consumption of raw flour. About 35% of US consumers actually report eating or tasting uncooked flour in the past 12 months. Next, please. We also further looked into who are these people who reported eating or tasting uncooked flour in the past 12 months. We looked into different demographic variables. And next, please. On the top, I'm showing the results for the quick turnaround survey. And later on the bottom, I will show the results from the 2019 FSIMS. So here we found from the quick turnaround survey on the gold medal flour recall, we found significant difference by age, whether having children in the household, and income. Those who are in the younger age group, 18 years to 29 years old, are much more likely to consume raw flour compared to those in the older age group, 70 and plus. So we're seeing the difference between 50% versus about 11-12%. Those families with children in the household are much more likely to consume uncooked flour compared to those without children. We're seeing a difference here about 46% versus 26%. And in terms of income, those with higher income were more likely to report consuming uncooked flour compared to those lower income brackets. Next, please. Now, on the bottom, we're having the results on the 2019 FSIMS, and we found very similar results. We found significant difference, again, by age, whether having children in the household, and income. And as you guys can tell, the patterns between the two surveys are actually almost identical. We can see that the similar results, having being younger, having children in the household, and having higher income for those consumers that are more likely to report tasting or eating uncooked flour. Next, please. Now, moving a little back to the quick turnaround survey, and then just looking at the quick turnaround survey, we asked another question, whether consumers taste or eat something with uncooked flour in there regularly. The sample size was 1,208 respondents, and we found 18% of US consumers reported doing that regularly. Again, we did some further analysis to look into who are these consumers. Next, please. And we found very similar results. Those who are younger, those with children in the household, and those with higher income are more likely to report consuming uncooked flour regularly. So this is also confirming our previous findings. Next, please. So to summarize it very quickly, in terms of consumption of flour, we found that from the quick turnaround survey on the gold medal flour recall, 83% of consumers reported eating or using flour in the past 12 months, with 58% reported eating or using flour regularly. We also have some very interesting findings in terms of consumption of uncooked flour. We found that 34% of US consumers reported tasting or eating uncooked flour in the past 12 months. And also we found 18% of consumers reported doing that regularly. We found that consumers who are younger, having children in their households, and having higher income are more likely to report consuming uncooked flour, and also more likely to report doing that regularly. And all these findings were very similar to the ones we had from the 2019 FSIMS, even though with some slight differences that for the 2019 FSIMS, we also found significant difference by education. Those with higher education were more likely to consume uncooked flour, and also difference by gender. Those who are female are more likely to consume raw flour. However, we didn't find those significant difference from the quick turnaround survey. Next slide. So this last slide is really showing some links that you guys can use to get the results from the 2019 FSIMS, a little bit more detail. And there's also a publication my colleagues and I published together on the results from the 2019 FSIMS, reporting on the raw flour results, which I used to compare with our quick turnaround survey data today. Next slide. Now I'm just going to turn the floor to Sharmi, who will be covering about FDA tools.
Thank you, Fanfan, and hello, everyone. As Fanfan mentioned earlier, I am the director for the Division of Education, Outreach, and Information in CIFSAN, and I'll be covering the next few slides. So as you may know, ideally, in a successful education initiative, we rely heavily on strong formative research and data, which informs many critical decision points when we do consumer education. For example, who is our audience? What are their characteristics? What are their perceptions, knowledge, behaviors related to the topic? And as you heard from Fanfan, we have all of this data currently, and we also plan to continue to monitor this space in the future. So let's talk about what are the implications for consumer messaging based on the data that we just heard. So very important, what we have to know first is who is our target audience, and we should really try to find ways of reaching our target audiences, women, including those who have higher education, families with young children. We also know that we have to increase awareness about the risks involved in consuming raw flour dough, cookie dough. And of course, we saw in the data that still a lot of people are tasting raw cookie dough fairly regularly. I'm sure it tastes good. So that's also another area that we definitely need to focus on for consumer education. Next slide, please. Okay, so Jane touched on this a little earlier. So just to reinforce a few things, the farm to table path for flour is fairly complex, as she explained, and there are several potential routes of contamination in the supply chain: farming, milling, packing, transportation, and finally getting to retail and then to consumers' homes. And microbial contamination can either get introduced or it can get carried forward in different stages of the supply chain. And again, as from NAMA, from North American Millers Association, we have some data. Only 5% of the flour that's produced in this country goes to the retail stream, that is to consumers' homes as all-purpose flour, baking, cake mixes, all kinds of blends and ready-made dough products. And the rest, 95%, those actually go to commercial stream, for example, bakeries, where it is likely to get a kill step. So, and we've also seen that recently in many of the recent outbreaks, they have actually implicated flour in the retail stream. So that's why I think it makes really a lot of sense for us to focus on that 5% that's the retail flour part of the whole equation. So we've been also looking at data from our recent flour outbreaks all the way from 2005 through 2023. And there appear to be two main contributing factors that led to these outbreaks. So pathogen contamination that's occurring at the farm or the mill, and that's carried forward in the supply chain, which is then followed by consumption of contaminated raw or improperly cooked flour and flour-based products in consumers' homes. And we are working on a prevention strategy to control the hazard at the mill. We're working closely with NAMA. And we also want to focus our efforts on the retail side of things as well as consumer education. Next slide, please. So this slide shows you some of our current resources that we have on fda.gov. I hope that you've seen these, and these are downloadable, and you can also order them in bulk from our website. I'll definitely add a link to that. And all of these materials include all of this information, essentially explaining the why, because remember, again, we know in food safety education, it's very important we explain the why to consumers. So explain why raw dough is risky, and then provide some tips to reduce their risks. I want to touch on the heat treating part because there has been some information on the internet about heat treating flour at home as a kill step. And this is something that we highly discourage. As you all may know, pathogen or the kill reduction, it really depends on a number of factors, including basic time and temperature. There are other factors like water activity, volume of the flour that's getting treated, type of equipment that's being used. So when industry heat treats flour, they validate the process and they take into account all of these different factors. However, when a consumer is doing this at home using a microwave or an oven, then, not all of these factors are taken into consideration. So therefore, FDA strongly discourages consumers from heat treating flour at home. Next slide, please. So we've learned from some of our previous food safety messaging that sometimes our messages don't resonate with consumers. When we put out social media messaging about, not tasting raw dough or raw cookie dough or cake batter, we've gotten quite a few mean responses. So we understand that this is something that people are used to doing. It tastes good. And those messages are not quite resonating with consumers. So we're working closely with our sister federal agencies to learn from each other and test some of our existing messages. We've learned from, don't wash your chicken message, where we have some strong lessons learned from that. So we want to also try some of harm reduction messages to see how consumers might react to those messages. We also want to make sure that we are targeting our messages appropriately to high-risk individuals, parents of young kids, those who are above 65 with compromised immune system. Again, really kind of focusing on washing hands after handling raw flour or dough, minimizing cross-contamination by wiping countertops, kitchen tools, et cetera, et cetera. And then we want to really find creative ways of promoting our materials through relevant platforms, maybe through recipes, targeting chefs, culinary schools, so that they can incorporate these behaviors and use those in recipes and their shows. We're very excited to work with NAMA and with all of you to explore ways of reaching your communities and stakeholders. So please share ideas with us. And of course, as always, we'll be working very closely with the partnership to disseminate our resources. So thank you for that. And we'll be happy to take questions at the end.
Okay, thank you, Fanfan and Sharmi, for your presentation. It's time for the third poll. So the question is, in the past year, how often have you received questions about flour as part of your work? The responses are once a week or more, a few times a month, only a few times, I'm not sure, or never. We'll give you just a little bit to fill that out, and then we'll share the results with you. Okay, we'll give you just a few more seconds. Alrighty, let's see the results for this poll. It looks like 2% said once a week or more, 4% said a few times a month, 34% said only a few times, 8% said I'm not sure, and 51% said never. So we're going to go ahead and move on to the next speaker, Katie Weston from the Partnership for Food Safety Education. She's going to be talking a bit about the resources that we've been working on recently.
Hi, everyone. So if you were one of those, I think it was about 50% that had received at least a couple questions this year about flour, we have some resources for you from the partnership to talk about flour that are new. So next slide, please. Can you click one more time so it shows up? Thank you. So in 2022, the partnership did a survey of health and food safety educators. About 570 completed the survey. And one of the things we asked was, which of our resources were you most familiar with? And the answer with the most responses was Food Safety Mythbusters. Next, please. But as you can see at the top there, our Mythbusters were a little bit out of date. Next. So in 2022, we redesigned them. Can you click one more time? And updated them. And this year, just now, we've also added 4 new flour myths to the redesigned Mythbusters. Next slide. So one of the first Mythbuster here, and I know it's kind of tiny, so I'll read it to you. It says, myth, after using flour at home, it's safe to wipe my hands on an apron or on a towel, then continue baking. And then in the fact, it goes through some of the key points. Flour is a raw ingredient. You need to wash your hands and utensils and bowls after you're handling raw flour. So that's the first myth that we have. Next. The second one reads, myth, it's safe to heat treat flour at home using my microwave or oven. It will kill any germs that might be in the flour. So a couple of our speakers have touched on this already, why it can be risky to heat treat at home. And in the facts, again, it reminds that flour is a raw ingredient. You shouldn't heat treat at home. And it needs proper baking according to package instructions to kill germs. Next myth. This one reads, my kids love to taste the dough or batter before we bake it. Just one bite won't hurt them or make them sick. Of course, that's false. And in the facts, it talks about how harmful germs like E. coli and Salmonella can be particularly risky for young children, and that you should bake your raw dough and batter before eating it. And then the fourth and final myth that we have on flour is homemade cookie dough is safe to eat in my ice cream, and it's delicious. And in the facts, it talks about how homemade cookie dough is not safe to eat and you need to bake it before eating it. Next slide. So those 4 myths are also all available in Spanish, and they can be found at fightback.org/mythbusters. So you can download those graphics in both English and Spanish. Next slide. So in addition to the new Mythbusters, we've also made a holiday baking tips video. It is again in both English and Spanish, and it can be found on our food safety YouTube channel. And we're gonna go ahead and play that for you now. So it might take a second to click over to the video and then we'll play it.
Baking together is a fun family tradition. Make sure you're careful when handling raw ingredients. Did you know that flour is a raw ingredient? Wheat comes from the farm, so it's minimally processed and then packaged for use. It goes straight to your kitchen with no additional processing involved. Because it's raw, flour may contain harmful germs like E. coli and Salmonella that cause food poisoning. Now it's time to start baking. The first step is to wash your hands with soap and water. While you're baking, avoid eating batter and dough that contains raw ingredients. Young children especially have a high risk of getting sick from raw ingredients like flour and eggs. Keep everyone healthy by fully baking your treats before eating them. Harmful germs can spread easily, so wash your hands every time you touch raw ingredients. Remember to wash bowls, utensils, countertops, and other surfaces that have touched raw flour and eggs with hot, soapy water. Following these healthy baking tips can help keep your family healthy and safe from food poisoning. Get more safe cooking tips and delicious recipes at storyofyourdinner.org and fightback.org.
So while we're clicking back to the slide, again, you can find that video on our food safety channel. And it's very short, so you could post it on any social media platform and share it there. Okay, next slide. So in addition to those new resources, we have some other resources on our website. The best place to find all the flower resources is fightback.org/flower safety. You can find everything related to flower. We also have recipes at storyofyourdinner.org, and there's a couple here. That long one is a baking infographic that we have in English and Spanish. And then we have a couple graphics specific to flower safety with children, the Say No to Raw Dough and E. coli Protect Your Child. And that's it for me. If you have any questions for me, add them to the Q&A now.
Okay, so now we're going to go ahead and pass the mic over to Brittany Saunier, the Executive Director of the Partnership for Food Safety Education. She's going to be the one moderating the Q&A session today. So if you have any questions, make sure they're in the Q&A box.
Thank you, Sarah, and thank you to all of our speakers for being part of this today. We really appreciate it. It's a pretty rich program. We've been getting tons of questions, and I'm so pleased to have your participation and interest, because that is exactly why we're hosting this webinar, is to make sure that you're informed, so that when you do get that question around flour, or maybe you might want to consider adding flour education into your offerings if you're doing a baking demo or any sort of education program where it might be related. So to get us started, this was a hot one out the gate. We had so many asking this question. And I think, Jane, maybe this is a good place for you to start here. People want to know about flour that is bleached, and they want to know, is that a safety step? What does that mean exactly? Oh, you're still muted.
Thank you. Sorry about that. Thanks for the question. Yes, bleaching is often misunderstood. It is a conditioning process for the flour. It is not a disinfectant process. So it is a way to change the texture of the flour to make it softer. But as you can tell, often those bleached flours are what are used in things like cakes and cookies, so things that might be consumed raw, but it is not a kill step.
Right. I think we often use bleach in sanitization efforts. So of course, I could see where that confusion comes from. So thank you. And also, back to you, Jane, another big question too, people want to know about that edible dough that's sold in the store. If you could just elaborate a little bit more about, what's done to ensure that safety and what to look for.
Yeah, thank you. And I think it's really important. Sharmi mentioned about validation, right? And so the companies that are selling flour for those applications where the product is going to be eaten raw, as in a raw cookie dough ice cream or a raw dough product that is meant to be eaten raw, they are going through a validated kill step in their milling process specifically for that product. And I was asked in the questions, why doesn't everything go through that kill step? It does add a cost to the finished product. And also because most applications of flour are in things like bread, where there is a kill step further in the process, companies don't feel it is necessary to do it in the milling process. But for those products where the ultimate product is ready to eat, will be consumed raw, they use a validated, either a heat treatment process or an acid-based process to provide the kill step in the mill.
Thank you. And another question that came up kind of related and I think is just great for framing of today's entire session, reason why we're here. Someone asked, well, what is the consequences of eating raw flour. And maybe Katie, I'll throw that to you. You know, why is this important?
So raw flour, you know, it can have things like salmonella and E. coli in it. And we talk about children a lot because children in particular are at high risk of very serious complications from salmonella and E. coli. So I know food poisoning can be mild, but it also can have very serious effects. And there was a stat at the beginning, it can even lead to death in some instances. So it's very important to consider those risks when you're thinking about consuming raw products.
So kind of why we have handling guidance for all sorts of food products, you know, all in the name of helping to reduce that risk of foodborne illness, which, you know, brings me to another question that was asked. And Sharmi, maybe you could take this one. Someone asked about cross-contamination and if raw flour has the potential for cross-contaminations, similar to how we talk about meat and poultry and raw vegetables and cross-contamination.
Yes, thanks for that question. Yeah, I know we most times we don't think of that for flour, right? When we're handling flour, we just don't think about cross-contamination that way, especially when we're thinking of meat and poultry and keeping those separate from fruits and vegetables and other ready-to-eat products. But it is a big concern because, especially because of I think the powdery nature of flour, it can spread really easily. So imagine if the flour already has a pathogen and you're trying to keep it contained, but handling flour a lot of times kind of it gets everywhere because of the powdery nature. So it's really important to keep that in mind, that you don't have any other you know, ready-to-eat products around when you're working with flour. And the other important thing to remember is really wiping down, you know, the surfaces, the tools, the kitchen tools, you know, even like I think you've mentioned about aprons and everything as you're handling raw flour.
Thank you. Yeah, it's amazing how quickly the flour gets away. I've been doing a lot of baking myself personally, and I've been more intentional in watching. It's like, oh, how did you end up over there? Yeah. And there were some questions about, you know, if it's all types of flours or if it's just, I mean, you know, alternative flour types as well. Jane, I think maybe.
Yeah, I can
Yeah.
start and Sharmi can add. So we think, and this is something that we're still researching, there is a particular element in wheat grain. It has a crease in it, and we feel that that crease might make it more susceptible to retaining pathogens like salmonella and E. coli. As example, corn does not have that same type of crease, and so we think that is in part why we don't see it with other grain, with corn products. But I think it would be too much to say there's no chance, there's zero risk with other grains, because those are also grown outside as well, and they go through the milling process where there is not a kill step. I would say oatmeal we consider to be to have a much lower risk profile, though, because oats do go through some heating when they're being processed. But I would say any raw flour, you know, deserves some watch outs before you would consider eating it raw. Sharmi, does that, you're nodding your head, Sharmi, so I think I'm okay on that.
Yeah. Yes, I was going to say, I don't think I can add anything more to that. One of the things that I think we'll all agree that this is not like, oh my gosh, I mean, we should, you know, stop eating flour. We should be so careful. I don't think we're trying to convey that. Just this awareness that it is a raw commodity, especially with certain target audiences, right? People who have weakened immune system, especially babies, children, and those who are 65 and over. So something to keep in mind that, a healthy person just taking a quick, lick of the cake batter most likely is going to be fine. But just increasing awareness about the risks, I think, is the big thing, because we heard from Fanfan's presentation that so many people actually also don't understand or know that there are risks involved with raw dough.
Thank you, Sharmi. And that it also, I think we think about that moment of taking that lick of the spoon as a common moment, and it is, but there are also moments where people may be using it for crafts with young ones, for example, creating homemade Play-Doh. And so, and as you just shared, that's a vulnerable population at a younger age. And so it's trying to, like you said, not bring any fear or scaring tactics into this, but just because it's important, it's an important thing for health to consume flour. So just bringing that awareness of how to handle it safely. And it kind of brings me to this next question for Fanfan, maybe this one for you. There were a lot of questions curious as to why, and maybe the study didn't show that track this, but why is it more prevalent in higher income households?
Yeah, that's a very good question. And we don't really have the answer for the question yet. We noticed that from our research and from the 2019 FCN survey, we noticed that, and it's in one of the publication I shared in the slide. You guys can check it out. We talked about what does our finding mean and all those kind of things. In general, we think that the higher income population tend to, in general research, they are likely to be engaged in riskier food-related behaviors in general. And seeing that in consumption of raw flour is kind of part of that, but we don't know what's the exact reason for it. But of course, we noticed it, and we're also gonna have some similar questions on our next round of FCNs, which is the National Representative Survey. So we're gonna keep monitoring that and do a little bit more investigation on that. But we think it really goes along with the general risk behavior kind of pattern with these like different demographic groups. And I know that there's also a question asking about gender and female. From the FCN survey, 2019 FCNs, we did find that significant difference in terms of more females are more likely to consume raw flour, which we didn't find in the quick turnaround survey. But from the 2019 FCN survey, we suspect that it was because females were more exposed to cooking from scratch and handling flour. Because in terms of general risky behaviors, females are actually less likely to engage in risky behaviors compared to males. However, in terms of flour, we think it's because women cook more.
Interesting. It's so interesting about how the perception of risk breaks down across different groups of people. One other question that's been popping up too is, and it makes sense why the questions go here next is, is heat treated flour available for purchase on shelves? Is that a solution?
Sure, I can take that one, Brittany.
Yeah,
At the moment, in the retail, like a grocery store, there is not heat treated flour available. We do anticipate that will be a future offering. There are some companies that do sell it online. So if you Google heat treated flour, I know of at least one company that is selling treated flour, but just it's expensive. So one bag of flour, I think, is over $10. And that's one of the reasons, that's a pretty high bar when you think about the demographic that flour is aimed at, right? It's meant to be a basic food staple that anybody can afford.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you. Yeah, it's also just reading those package labels too, will tell you if you're not sure and you're just curious. Maybe next time you're in the flour aisle, take a gander and just check out the different packaging and where the messages for handling and safety exist. Next question is for Katie. We debuted, and maybe this is just some shameless promotion of our resources, but and also the resources that the FDA shared, because they're very similar in nature and how they can be used. What are some recommended scenarios for using these resources?
Yeah,
Kate.
great question. So they're graphics, right? I mean, the obvious first answer is you could be posting them and sharing them on social media, but I think there's a lot of other ways you could use them. I've heard from a lot of food safety educators that they do PowerPoint presentations when they're teaching classes. So you could incorporate those into your PowerPoint presentation. You could even include them in printouts if you want. As you're handing things out, you could have one of those myths on the printout or one of those other graphics in the printout. And if you need help picking resources, you're always welcome to contact me. I can put my email in the chat and we could come up with ideas together.
Thank you, Katie. Yes, I've heard, educators might use them in nutrition counseling sessions. If you're doing any of that type of work, or if you're working with families directly, this could be just a great leave behind as a nice reminder as well, in WIC settings as well. I was just curious about that. I thought about it. It's like, oh, graphic, how do you use this? So another question I have that we've heard in the past is around recalls and containers. And I think this is something that has been, in discussion, but I think is an element worth considering when you're doing education. And perhaps Jane or Sharmi, you might be good for this question, but should there be a recall scenario? A lot of times people place their flour in like a cute jar or some sort of organizational element, right? And so do you have any recommendations for people, should they choose to do that, on how they can stay informed of what's happening with that flour?
That's such a good point, Brittany, and thank you for bringing that up. For flour, I can see that as a kind of happening pretty often, because many of us have like a flour jar or a specific container for flour, and but we see that for other products as well, where people will just transfer it to something else and they lose the packaging. So it's really hard to keep track of the lot number and the product number and things like that. So we definitely will keep that in mind as we develop additional materials to kind of remind people through social media that, if you are doing that, maybe just cut out, that just bit of information and stick it into the inside of the jar, the lid, or something like that, something that might be easy for people to do. But I certainly would like to hear from others if you all have ideas, if there are some other options. But it's a very good point. Thanks.
Well, and that's something we've been thinking about too, as well, in terms of adding to the education around handling of flour as we grow this awareness. So I wanted to bring that up as an offering for anyone who's working with the community, and you wanted to add that layer into your communications as well about, how to store it too.
Yes.
Yeah.
One of the things, Brittany, I've seen, people, obviously we always have our phones with us. So people just take pictures of everything now. So that's also another practical, I think, tip for people, that if you are, if you choose to take it out of the original packaging, then you take a picture and you keep it. But yes, we will. Thanks for the reminder. We'll definitely put that message out through social media as well.
We will join you. Thank you. Okay, well, I think we're at about time for our Q&A. There were a lot of questions about if these resources will be available post. Absolutely. You'll receive an email where to access the resources. We'll capture all the links from the chat, and also you'll be able to access the slideshow files. So you'll be able to click directly through them as well to those websites. So, and then of course the burning question about CEUs, which perhaps is a prompt for me to reintroduce Sarah back so she can tell you all of that. good stuff.
Okay, so it looks like we finished the Q&A. So make sure you keep an eye out for everything that we have coming up. We have the story of your dinner videos. November, we'll have turkey handling tips, and December, buffets and holiday parties. We once again want to thank our community connectors, as well as all of our contributing partners on the next slide. And we also encourage you guys to stay involved with us. So stay involved with us, make a $10 charitable gift, work with us as a partner, follow our socials, or sign up for our biweekly e-card and monthly cooking times and lasting lessons e-newsletters. You can also please fill out that survey that's going to pop up at the end of this webinar. And as a final reminder, the 1-hour CEUs are available. You can download them from the chat box in the follow-up email we will be sending out, as well as at thefightback.org under free resources and recorded webinars. And just one last time, if you are seeking the NCHEC credits, you must complete online questionnaires by Tuesday, January 2nd in order to receive those. So thank you again for joining us. We appreciate all of our speakers and all of our viewers. So yeah, thank you guys once again.
Thank you, everyone.